In the 1930s, the cradle of Nazism. As Hitler prepared to dominate Europe, he nursed a dream, the nation of a master race. 10 years later, the innocent victims of Hitler's monstrous plan began to reap the whirlwind he had sown. Only now can we reveal the part one country, Norway, played in their suffering. Frida Lyngstad, singer with the world-famous pop group Abba, was just one of those whose lives were turned upside down by the fallout from Hitler's great experiment. Few lives remained untouched as the Nazi military machine swept across Europe. Even when the nightmare was over, the after-effects took years to fade. For 10,000 babies born in wartime Norway, Hitler's legacy was to dominate their entire lives. For them, it was as if the war had never ended. As children, they were part of the biggest eugenics experiment the world has ever seen. For years, they suffered in silence.
I was put in a mental institution because I had a German father.
When I was 7, I had to ask my mother what German whore meant, because that's what they called me at school.
I was sexually abused in a children's home because I had a German father.
These people suffered because of events generated long before their birth. Their story reaches back to the 1930s, when Adolf Hitler's preoccupation with racial purity was growing into an obsession. In 1935 at Nuremberg, Hitler translated his theories into law. From that day on, Germany was subject to a program of racial selection based upon the belief that Aryans were genetically superior. Rassenprüfer, or race examiners, were trained to measure and assess racial purity. Their specifications were precise: long head, narrow face, well-defined chin, soft fair hair, blue or grey eyes, pink white skin. With strict selective breeding, Hitler expected all racial impurities to be eradicated in 2 generations. To hasten the growth of the master race, there were incentives for those pronounced suitable to reproduce. Women were expected to have at least 4 children for the Führer. If they did, they were rewarded with a medal, the Mother Cross. Hitler chose SS chief Heinrich Himmler, himself an enthusiastic supporter of the master race theory, to implement his policy. He set up special homes where racially approved women could give birth to their children. They were called Lebensborn homes, Lebensborn meaning fountain of life. Helmi Ziegler was a nurse who looked after the women and children at the Lebensborn home in Friesland, northeast Germany.
Soldiers and members of the SS were told to father children in order to invigorate the Nordic race. That was very important to them. The mothers who came here had to bring their documents to prove there were no impurities in their family tree, back as far as their grandparents.
Himmler ordered the supposedly pure men of the SS to father as many children as possible, not only with their wives, but with any suitable Aryan woman. Helmi Ziegler remembers the effect this had on the men.
Dieser Heimleiter
The director of the home was an SS sergeant. He told me, with my figure and my Nordic looks, I should have a baby myself. And if I didn't have a partner, he would be happy to perform that service for me too.
Helmi refused his offer, but thousands of women did decide to enter the Lebensborn program. At the homes, they were rewarded with the best medical care. Then they could either take their children home or leave them to be adopted later into an SS family. Himmler took a great personal interest in the well-being of the future master race. Under his imaginative stewardship, Lebensborn became a quasi-religious organization with its own rituals.
Oh ja, ich habe mir zum Beispiel eine Namensgebung miterlebt.
Once I took part in a naming ceremony, or baptism. An SS division came from Bremen to celebrate it. One of them held a dagger on the tummy of the baby and said, "Your name is Heiko, bear your name with pride," or something like that. Afterwards, they sang songs of the fatherland. And then there was a big party.
There was a sinister urgency to the Lebensborn project. For the other arm of Hitler's racial purity policy was the eradication of those he considered racially undesirable: Jews, Gypsies, and many others. They were to be replaced by the pure Lebensborn. But the scale of the Holocaust deaths was so vast that the numbers of new approved babies simply couldn't keep pace. The program needed to expand. Hitler's army had been rampaging through Europe for over a year. By 1940, he'd set his sights on Norway. The German Navy took on the British fleet in the North Sea, while the Luftwaffe attacked British and Norwegian forces on the ground. Before long, the unstoppable German war machine had moved in, and Norway had become yet another outpost of the Third Reich. The Germans originally wanted Norway for its iron ore, but what turned out to be irresistible were the genes of the people themselves, about as purely Aryan as it was possible to get. The local population was all but swamped by an occupying force of nearly 500,000. Young German soldiers were everywhere. They were outgoing and apparently making an effort to fit in with the locals. Their presence turned village life upside down.
The Germans occupied the houses, and their physical contact with the Norwegians was very close, and there was absolutely no way of escaping this contact for the Norwegians. If you take a small village where maybe in a population of 40 people, maybe there was 4 or 5 young girls from 16 to 18 years, 20 years, and suddenly 400 German soldiers came. It was very, very difficult to avoid that some of these girls and some of these Germans became lovers in some way or another.
Agnes Jensen was one of those girls. She wasn't surprised that the local girls found the German soldiers attractive.
You see,
Norwegian men couldn't take us to the cinema or anything because there was a lot of unemployment, so we didn't get asked out. But the Germans used to have parties in their barracks. Not that I went to any of them, but they had a lot of fun.